Dog Days is an unusual beast. The show was released as a part of the spring 2011 anime lineup, and was directed by Keizo Kusakawa and written by Masaki Suzuki, both of whom were involved with the Mahou Shoujo Lyrical Nanaha series, with Masaki Suzuki credited as the original creator for both shows. On the surface, it seems like a show for those with a liking for Kemonomimis, as it's full of them and is set in a magical fantasy world where you have some hero who's stuck in said world and has to fight the bad guys for the good guys, etc. etc. With the exception of the dog and cat people that fill the world itself, it should have been same old same old. What it ends up being is a show with a very unique concept under its belt, featuring a world that's good on the eyes, but has ultimately flawed execution when it comes to everything else. The plot is pretty simple. Dog Days is mostly centered around our protagonist named Shinkyu Izumi, a half-British boy who during the last day of middle school before summer break is transported via an interdimensional portal into the fantasy world of Flonyard. There he meets a princess named Miliore Firiano Biscotti, or Millie for short, current leader of the Biscotti Republic, who are waging a war with the Galette Lion Army, led by Leon Michelli, Galette des Rois, or Leo. We find out that Millie summoned Shinkyu because of his athletic skills and offers him to become the Biscotti Republic's hero in order to turn the tides of the current battle being waged. Shinkyu agrees to become their hero, and this basically sets up the rest of the series. Shinkyu meets other characters like Ricotta Elmar, Eclair Martinozzi, Leo's little brother Gull, and among others. He also learns more about Flonyard, fights, and you know what, you get the idea. Seems pretty generic, but the show manages to throw in an effective twist. You see, the soldiers fighting in battle can't actually die on the battlefield, and instead turn into devolved forms of whatever species they are derived from, whenever they are knocked out or touched on the back. The Biscotti troops temporarily turn to dogs, while the Galette army turn to cats. You see, how this works is that each battle is set up as a sort of sport, having announcers, a score counter, and even a big payout for the winning faction, which is the most interesting part. Before a battle, each person pays a participation fee. The money is then added up into a reward purse, with the winning team taking 60% of the reward, while the losing faction takes the rest. The money earned is then used to expand, pay servants, etc. etc. What makes this interesting is that these battles tie into each faction's economy, being that the faction that wins the most is going to have the better, more thriving economy. It's a concept that keeps the show from being completely generic, but unfortunately, it's a concept that is barely explored. We never see how much losing battles can really affect anything. It all seems to be downplayed and can feel like a missed opportunity to give more depth to the world, which, speaking of depth, are what the characters lack. We don't really get much of a reason to care all that much for Shinkyu. I mean, he's stuck in a fantasy land with no viable source of communication to his world, where his friends and family don't even know his location, yet despite this, he cares more about what's happening in Flonyard than what's happening in his world, which dramatically overshadows his plight for wanting to go back, making it feel tacked on. Sure, we get some backstory where he competed in an athletic competition and ended up losing, but this only served to simply give a reason why Shinkyu never gives up and all that crap we've heard a million times. Hell, it doesn't even do much to serve as a sort of reminder of Shinkyu's own humanity, that he's not perfect and will at some point fail. Our hero, ladies and gentlemen.
Never give up!
Millie is only there to serve as the typical girly princess and love interest for the protagonist, with the only real twist being that she's a pop singer. Yes, you heard me right, and before you ask, no, it's not a spoiler. This is something that's established early on. She spends the rest of the series doing stuff, getting kidnapped at some point, and is subjected to the cliche, boy accidentally seeing girl naked routine. Cause you know, seeing 14-year-old girls naked is hilarious. Leo is, to be honest with you, really, really hot. Yeah, I have a thing for Nekomimi, but aside from being the really hot chick of the show, she plays the role of former friend before becoming enemy, but not quite. She really isn't the antagonist of the show, which I will discuss later, and she might even be the best character, to be honest. since when she and Millie were little, they were practically like sisters, and even now she still cares for her well-being. So we can't even find a real antagonist in her, and you even end up feeling that she's really cool. Then you have Eclair, who really just serves as the typical I will never lose to you character, who just so happens to have a hint of affection toward our protagonist. Rikota is a lolly researcher on magic who throughout the series tries to find a way to bring Sinkyu back to his world. Then Leo's brother Gall comes into the story at some point to give the impression that he's the antagonist, but then turns around and goes, nope. And really, those are the characters that are worth mentioning. Therein lies one of the problems with Dog Days. The cast just isn't very good. With the exception of Leo, the main characters are just bags of potential that end up not being completely filled, making them feel as though they are just there to do whatever they are meant to do. The rest are kind of unimportant as you barely get to know any of them. You won't remember this guy or this chick or any of them for that matter. But there's another problem, and it's that the show doesn't have a clear antagonist. Even in a fantasy world where soldiers don't really die in battle, there still has to be someone to be against. But just when a potential candidate for this role comes around, they never follow through. And when the show does get real, and we do get the closest thing to an antagonist in this show, the resolve is so anticlimactic that it might as well have never happened at all. Another problem with Dog Days is that it never truly knows what it wants to be. It tries to be a show that doesn't take itself seriously, but in the end, it just doesn't work. This is because the show does take itself seriously. The thing is that everything is set up in a bland manner, giving off the feeling of having no real conflict or any real stakes on the line until later, but by then decides to end it as soon as it started. If done in another way, this could have worked. But instead we have a show that takes everything seriously, even though it's not meant to be, but doesn't know that it isn't supposed to be, making the show unfocused. However, if I have to say anything that isn't completely negative about Dog Days, I do like how the battles that occur in the show are set up like a spectator sport. Not only are they fairly amusing to watch, but they also succeed at giving the battles themselves their own identity. Plus, the fights that happen outside of the battlefield can be kinda cool. Then you get to the presentation of Dog Days, and I have to say, this is where the show does get its shine. As bland as the characters can get, they do have good designs with expressive outfits. Not to mention that some of the characters do look pretty cute, with some looking downright hot. But the characters aren't the only good-looking aspects, as everything else has a bright, colorful, and occasionally beautiful fantasy aesthetic, which is helped by its eye-catching use of lighting. Though I will say, come on, those are obviously Chocobos, okay? Who are you kidding? It can look like pure eye candy when displayed in high definition. The moment where Millie goes on stage and sings is downright gorgeous, and is one of the best highlights of the show, even if the song and her mouth don't sync properly. Though, speaking of music, the soundtrack doesn't quite hold up as well. Sure, it isn't terrible, but it's mostly generic and entirely forgettable. The voice acting isn't too memorable either. Cute characters sound cute. Tough characters sound tough. You pretty much get the drill. But still, Dog Days' presentation is probably the best part that I could talk about. And if you somehow decide that you want to watch this show, I advise watching it in HD. But in the end, Dog Days is somewhat entertaining and very pretty, but it's also bland, generic, and unfocused. It's a show that upon finishing, I never seem to remember much of, and to me is one of the weaker shows of spring 2011. That's not to say it's the worst anime I've seen in 2011. Trust me, I've seen worse. And I guess I can recommend checking out an episode to see what you think, but ultimately, Dog Days was a show with potential that was never lived up to. Now, with the second season of Dog Days coming out as a part of the summer 2012 lineup, I wonder if it'll fare any better. And yes, I will be checking it out. But until then, I give Dog Days a Shizune Hakemichi.